I've always thought Damascus knives are really cool, and in fact, I've always wanted to make one, but my metalworking skills are pretty horrible. Luckily, I just so happen to have an entire garage filled with a bunch of woodworking tools, and I figured maybe I could make a knife out of wood, so let's go try that. So, like any good woodworking project starts off, I'm going to need to gather some wood and cut it up. While I'm at it, I decided I'm going to make two knives instead of one just in case I mess up on the one. I then decided to go with walnut and poplar for the one knife and cherry and maple for the other. Basically, for this project, to get the Damascus effect I'm going for, I'm going to need a bunch of really thin strips. They need to be about the same thickness as a veneer so you can bend them without snapping. These aren't quite thin enough yet, and you can tell this because they shouldn't make this sound. To get these strips thinner, I'll end up running them through the drum sander until they're almost as thin as like a sheet of paper. But I feel like I need to give some context to explain how real steel Damascus knives are made, so everything that I'm doing kind of makes sense. So, someone who actually knows how to metalwork will start with two different layers of steel and weld it together in layers to create a big block of steel. Then you smush it down and you dent on each side to make it squiggly. Then you sand down the squiggles and this is what you get. Now that's a super basic explanation, but I think you'll see more as I go through the process a little bit. Now since I needed to get these strips extremely thin, I needed to attach them to a flat piece of particle board since my drum sander will only go down to about 1/8 of an inch. The easiest way to do this is just by using some good old blue tape and CA glue. Now this process would have been probably 10 times easier if I would have just ordered some veneer. I could have skipped this whole process, but that would cost money and I don't like spending money. So I think these days it's really hard to come up with an original idea, especially on YouTube. A few nights ago I was brainstorming about my next project and I thought about making this knife out of wood. I thought, surely no one has ever done a Damascus knife out of wood, right? Well, I was wrong. I went to YouTube to see if anyone had this idea and I was not the first. It turns out John Heiss made one about 7 years ago. So I'm a little late to the trend, but I decided I still wanted to try and make it, but I'll just be the second one to do it, I guess. So now that we have our strips paper thin, I have to be really careful when removing them from the tape since they could easily snap. Luckily, I got out free and none of them snapped. But once I got them off the tape, we could start laying them out. I'm alternating each layer of wood until I have about 25 layers in total. You can see how flexible the wood is now, and that's what we're looking for. Here I'm cutting out the small pieces, which I'll call the squigglers, I guess. I honestly can't think of a better name. Anyways, these will be spaced out in the clamps so we can get that curvy pattern. I practiced clamping in the blank before I put any epoxy on, just to make sure this would work. So, after the practice run, it's time for the real thing. I mentioned I'm using epoxy to glue all the layers together, and that's because I feel like it'll just do a better job than wood glue. Also, I used it so I can convince everyone that I look like I know what I'm doing. Once I mixed the epoxy up, it was time to be Picasso and paint it all over the strips. I ended up having way more epoxy than I thought I needed, and I only glued up one knife at a time because I was too lazy to make clamps for the other one. This is the first time I'm doing any type of bent lamination like this, and honestly, it was pretty fun. I am excited to try this on a larger piece of furniture someday once I muster up the guts to try, but we'll get to it sooner or later. Once we got the clamps on, we can watch the epoxy ooze out and let it sit to dry for a bit. Alright, I gave you a quick break there from hearing my voice. Anyways, this next part was definitely the part I was the most excited for. I get to see if the pattern turned out how I was hoping. I honestly was kind of nervous it wouldn't look right, but there was only one way to find out. I made an attempt to shave some of the curves off with my bandsaw. If I had a competent saw, this probably would have worked, but I'm about ready to throw this one off a cliff. Sorry, lime green brand that I probably shouldn't say the name of. I used the oscillating belt sander instead to get a flat surface on both sides. You could definitely see the pattern start to show, which was really cool and exciting. I decided to flatten the rest of it out. I would use the drum sander. Again, since I needed to get this piece pretty thin, I glued it on a thicker piece of wood. This honestly just makes it a bit sturdier since the piece isn't even close to being flat. To be honest, I find myself using my drum sander more than what I thought I would. I honestly thought I would just use it for like sanding cutting boards and other panels. But for smaller projects like these, it's super handy. I would say by now I got this one I'm using roughly a year ago, and I recently checked the price of it and I was shocked. I noticed it went up like $400, which is just insane to me. Gotta love inflation. But let me know if you have a drum sander or plan to get one. When I was taking the cherry knife blank off the board, it actually broke. And this wasn't too surprising considering how thin the strip was and the wavy strips in the blank. This isn't really a big deal though. I just glued it back together. Just a little band-aid for the guy, and it was all better. I printed out these Japanese style kitchen knife templates I found online. I feel like you could just as easily draw them onto the blank, but I'm no artist and I didn't want to come this far and mess up. After that, we could head over to my least favorite tool, my favorite tool, and cut along the lines. This sucker was finally starting to look like an actual knife for the first time. I didn't worry about having to get a perfect cut on the bandsaw because once it was cut out, I could take it to my belt sander and shape it down till it was perfect. For my handles, I went with a small piece of scrap walnut I had laying around. I traced the handle of the knife onto the scrap piece, and yep, you guessed it, I cut out those pieces too and sanded to the lines. I thought this was a good time to go ahead and sand the knife before I glued on the handles. Also, I needed to get rid of the glue and the paper, so I kinda had to sand it away anyways. I glued the handle on and clamped it tight with some F-style clamps. I made the handles a bit oversized so I could shape them down easily once they dried. I did the bulk of the handle shaping on the belt sander again. I changed to the spindle sander to get a bit more detailed. And to do the fine sanding and shaping, I clamped down my knife to my workbench and cut out a small thin strip of sandpaper. Then I could go around each side and sand it until it was smooth. This was honestly pretty fun to do, and I did this probably a little longer than I needed it to, but it created a really smooth surface for the handle. So, what is a knife without a sharp blade? I had no idea how to sharpen an edge like this on a knife, considering I've never made anything like this before. So, using my best instinct, I clamped down a full sheet of sandpaper and just started sanding the edge away. I mean, it took a good while, but eventually I actually did get a pretty good looking edge on it. Finally, we can go ahead and finish up this fairly useless piece of wood with everyone's favorite finish, Rubio Monocoat. It was awesome to see that Damascus pattern come to life, and I'm still pretty surprised with how good it looks. So I wanted to show you guys how sharp the knife actually is, so I did the age-old test where I shaved my arm hair. Yeah, it's not actually that sharp, but that would be cool. Anyways. Oh, I think the knife is trying to tell you something, and I feel like you should probably listen. Anyways, thanks for watching, and there's some other cool videos here if you would like to watch. I'll see you in the next one.